something to work from. All right, hopefully you all can see that.
Mhm.
Cool. And I see some of you that I recognize from this lovely community and other people that are new. So it's really nice to meet everybody or to see you again. I'm trying to remember, Mary, how long ago I joined the community, but it's been a couple years, and it's been a really awesome place. So if you are new here, you're in for something great. I have been in customer marketing for probably like a decade now, which is a really long time. Started in a much more B to SMB environment and have been doing enterprise for the last probably 5 or 6 years at this point, at a couple of different companies. So a lot that I can share. I'm currently at WordPress VIP, which is the enterprise version of WordPress. We're part of Automatic, which is the company surrounding WordPress. So events, what I like to say with virtual events is you get to go big and go home, which is always kind of nice when you don't have to get on a plane and go somewhere. And I think when I started to think about this, it was like, oh, well, like, what am I even going to talk about? Because it's such a big topic and there's so many different directions it can go. And I hope that we can talk about all of them, right? Because it can be, you can do a virtual event that's right, that's an entire conference and that's big and that's really fancy and that has all these great things. And you can also do a virtual event that's like for 10 people, that is maybe really small and focused, but also really impactful for the people that are there. So hopefully we can talk about all of those things. So just some examples from my life of some of those different types of events, right? So one is doing, again, this is the smaller, like a very specific for a group of customers in an industry to talk about something that's impacting them. And so we had customers come together and talk a lot about things like, hey, the search engines are making algorithm updates. Now we have AI search results of more media companies. Like, what does that mean for us? How are we thinking about that? How are we responding? In the middle of an example of a product launch webinar, I think this is probably something a lot of folks have either attended one or hosted one, but more of that. We want to bring a wider set of customers together, show off a little bit, give some information, and hopefully get people to actually take some action and use whatever it is that we're launching. And then the last example here is, this is from like peak COVID era 2021 of, hey, we're going to take our entire customer conference and instead of it being a week in a hotel, everybody coming together, we're going to move the entire thing online. We're going to have a whole slew of different sessions and different tracks and different interactive features and, kind of pull out all the stops. So it can really be anything, and we can talk as much or as little about any of these types of events as people want. And then what I wanted to do was just put together baselines that I think apply no matter what, right? So like number one is when you're thinking about a virtual event, it has to be really great content. I think sometimes when you're in person, there's a little bit more wiggle room because they're there. They already got on the plane. They already took the time off work. Like they're not going to leave probably unless it's like really terrible. And you can also sort of woo people with, well, like the food is great, or it's at this really nice resort. And so I'm going to stick around kind of no matter what, right? Whereas I think with something virtual, if it's not great, like everybody's busy, everybody's got a million things to do. And so if they're there and they're like, meh, see you later, right? It's really easy to just close out that window and say goodbye. So really making sure that the content is top notch for whatever that type of event is. The communication becomes really important. Again, it's just so much easier to sign up for something digital and kind of forget about it. And so making sure that folks have it top of mind, that they know it's coming, that they're getting excited for it, that they think it's worth continuing to protect that time for, because again, it's It's different when you're out of the office than when you're like, yeah, I'm here and I'm just going to take an hour to go to this session. And then, oh, well, actually, this meeting came up. And so now I'm not going to go after all. Thinking about how we follow up, right? So I think the expectations are for everything to happen faster when it's virtual. So maybe if you go to a conference and you get some sort of follow up a week later, that makes sense, right? If it's virtual and it's a whole week later, like that is so far gone that it really has to be much faster, which means that we have to be much more on top of what is it that we're going to do and is it ready to go out pretty much instantaneously. Tech, of course, right? Is it an easy experience for your attendees? If you have multiple speakers, does everybody's camera work? Does everybody's microphone work? Do they know how to do all the transitions, how to go on or off stage or be on or off mute? I mean, I think at this point, most people hopefully know most of that, but it's always helpful to practice, especially if you're in a platform that's maybe not Zoom or Google Meet that people are in a lot of the time. Thinking about attention span, right? I think we all kind of got this Zoom fatigue where you're sitting in virtual meetings for 8 hours a day and you just can't. Like nobody can focus that long. And so, really thinking about how to keep the content as succinct as it can possibly be. Are you building in enough breaks throughout the day, knowing that people are going to need to check their Slack, check their email, they're going to need to get a drink or use the bathroom or whatever that they're going to need to do? And so, are you building in places for that to happen so that's not happening during the content? And then finally, really thinking about how are you engaging with people, right? And so that is, yes, you've come and you're going to get some content, but ideally, when you leave, it's not just, hey, somebody presented on a topic and I learned a thing, but I also was part of something bigger, right? I'm now part of this community of people that attended the event, or I have more of an affinity for the presenter or for the brand that presented or whatever it is. And hopefully that's kind of happening here today, right? So if you've been in the community, you've been in Slack, and now you're here and you're at this event, like hopefully you'll leave and you'll feel like, oh yeah, like now, if I see Lauren's name pop up, I know who that is. Or, for each other as we go, again, hopefully we'll all be talking, not just me the whole time. And so you guys will start to form a relationship with each other and with this community that you're a part of. So I'm going to stop there because I said I wasn't going to talk that much. And then I talked for a long time. So first off, does that resonate? Are there things that I missed? Are there things that you disagree with?
No, you're right on target. I completely agree with you so far.
So then moving on, a couple things that I wanted to chat about, right? And again, this is something you can kind of scale up or scale back depending on what you're doing. So really thinking about your platform, right? So if we're bringing together a handful of customers for a conversation, probably Zoom is fine, right? Like for something like what we're doing today, this platform is great. It works. You don't really need anything fancy. I would say, still take the time to make a nice branded welcome screen for when people are waiting to be let in or anything like that that can be customized, but you probably don't need anything crazy. As you're getting into a more, robust event, you might want a different platform, and whether that's something, where'd my camera go? Whether that's something to do with, just moving up tiers with your normal meeting provider, or whether you want to look at some of the virtual event platforms. I think you want to start to think about that user experience. And so if people are going to be moving between multiple sessions, or you're going to have sessions and breakout rooms and back and forth, or maybe you're going to have partners or vendors that are going to have almost like a virtual booth situation, right? You'll want to think about what platform can you use and what's going to make that really smooth user experience. That's something I know I've been surprised at the amount of feedback that we've gotten from attendees saying, hey, that was actually really easy, or that felt really slick. And I think people go to so many events where there is this like, we're just going to make a standard meeting platform work in this very complex situation that it wasn't built for. And usually like you can do it, but it's not great. And it doesn't feel great as an attendee. So really thinking about, if you're trying to do something bigger and more special, can you invest in a platform that's going to match that? And there are off-the-shelf platforms. There, I mean, that virtual conference we did, we had an entire platform custom built from scratch. You probably don't want to do that for every single event. And I think the platforms themselves have improved a lot in the last couple of years, but there's sort of this entire range of things out there, and it's worth doing some research and figuring out what's going to give the right experience. I think thinking about something tangible that you can do. So just because somebody is attending the event virtually, how can you bring it to them in a more real way? So is it sending them a nice piece of swag that arrives before the event? Is it, whether it's shipping them food or shipping them a gift card to order lunch while they're on the meeting or whatever it is? I think some of those extra touches can also really go a long way, especially if you do something that, again, feels a little bit more elevated. So maybe it's not Uber Eats, maybe it's sending something from Goldbelly or a gift card, right? It's just something that feels a little bit nicer than whatever they would probably have for lunch on a like normal Tuesday. And then finally, activities, right? So depending on what you're doing, sometimes it's great to throw in something fun. Sometimes it's not, and people just want to like get in, get down to business and get out. But I think if you're doing a larger event, it's worth thinking about, is there an opportunity to do something a little bit more fun, a little bit more social? There's a million and one vendors out there, or you can obviously do it yourself, that can come in and run a trivia game, that can send you some sort of kit and then lead you through making something tangible, whether that's art or something edible or flower arranging or anything under the sun. There's so many different vendors running so many different creative activities at this point that the options are sort of endless. And I think it's just dependent on your audience and what people are going to be excited about. And then this one, I hope we can have some discussion specifically about this slide, because I think this is where it gets really hard, right? So how do you think about keeping people engaged, and what are some of those tactics that you can use? And this is where I've personally been to some events where either things go really, really well and it's awesome, or things like fall off the rails a little bit and you leave going kind of like, I don't know if that was great. So one is breakout rooms. I think when you send people to breakout rooms, being really thoughtful about how you do that, making sure like, is there somebody in the room that can answer questions? Is there somebody that can make sure that everything gets going? I think we've all had the experience of, you got in a breakout room and everybody gets there and looks at each other and goes, no, what were we supposed to do again? What are we supposed to be talking about? Did we have 10 minutes? Was it 15 minutes? And so just making sure that everything is very simple, so that right, if you have 25 steps to follow, like that's going to be gone from people's heads. So really thinking through, what can you do? And yeah, Alex, I think the idea of assigning a captain to be in that room, to get the conversation going, to keep everybody on track, to answer those like, nope, it was 10 minutes. And at the end of 10 minutes, we're going to be expected to report out on 2 ideas, or we're going to just go back and hear the next speaker, or whatever it is, making sure that that is really, really clear.
Can I ask
Yeah,
a question?
of
Yeah.
course.
And you might be able to answer this too, but I was going to ask Alex, with this idea of the breakout room captains, how do you decide who that's going to be? Is it like, can you tell me a little bit about like is this for customer calls that you have or something like that? And then how you decide who those captains will be?
Sure. So Sam and I run a virtual meetups program where we invite our customers and also our colleagues, other Autodeskers that want to join in on the conversation to talk about a theme each month. So they're not sales calls in any way. They are the unwebinar. We try and get people speaking immediately, popcorning answers, and then diving into a discussion. So to answer your question about breakout rooms, we always have a host and a guest. And Sam and I are both kind of back end. I'll MC, she's running back end, getting the breakout rooms ready. So we have a solid team for the mechanics of it all. And when we are pitching our hosts and our guests, we let them know, hey, you're going to do a little intro, drop a few knowledge nuggets, and then we're going to dive into a breakout room and you'll have this one and you'll have that one. And we even do a slide where we kind of sell each breakout room. If you want to continue talking about that, go with Drew, or if you want to try this, go with Johnny. And so they get to read what the title is. They get to see the faces of the people they're going to be, the captains. And sometimes we even, sometimes a lot of people want to get involved on the Autodesk side for the meetup. So we have, 2 captains per room. And yeah, sometimes maybe there will be more Autodeskers than there are customers, but then that customer feels really special because they have access to knowledge and can turn into a kind of little personal Q&A. And, we just started the program, so we're getting more and more people to show up. But like you said in the beginning, sometimes an intimate meetup is really beneficial. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it definitely did. I do a lot of roundtables and like talk to companies about setting those up and getting ready. And so I wanted to hear like how you set those up because I like to make sure, who's going to be in these breakout rooms or who's going to be in the Zoom and who can answer like a couple maybe softball questions to kind of help get the engagement rolling, and who can share some of their expertise that I know of on the back end. And, obviously there can be a lot of planning going into that. And I found that over time, as you're doing more of these events, it really gets to be on the fly because certain people in the
Yeah.
in the audience and things like that. So yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you. Lauren, what are
Yeah, I
you?
could share what. Oh, I was
Oh,
going to
go ahead.
say before I forget, I think this would be beneficial for everyone to hear. On the fly, you'll only know who shows up once the event starts. Even if you have 77 registrations, 20 people show up. Now you're sending 10 people each, or maybe 8 and 12 into a breakout room for 20 minutes. How are you going to fill that time if the conversation starts? So anyway, if you have 50 people in a breakout room, you're not going to have time for everyone to go around and say their name. But if you need to kind of eat up 5 minutes, we always like to ask, if it's a small group, what's your name? Where are you coming in from? And what's your thought on this? That way, it's just a nice way to make sure you can fill the time, as opposed to a ton of people. You can't do that, but it's just an on the fly thing that I think has been important that we implement when it's smaller groups.
Yeah, and also to piggyback off of what Alex is saying, we definitely make sure to prep our facilitators, so to speak, or breakout room captains, so that they know, hey, there might be awkward silences, or hey, this is what the room topic is about. So, most likely or most definitely, those people will also be experts in what the conversation will be about, so that at least, at the very least, they're able to facilitate in case it's like no engagements happening or no conversations are happening. And at the very most, they're able to answer maybe more complex industry specific questions or product related questions, whatever the conversation is supposed to be about. So that sort of preparation ahead of time is very helpful and intended to make it go a lot smoother. So yeah.
Awesome. And I think one thing I want to call out that is, I think, implied in everything that you're saying, but I want to make sure we say it out loud, is that the facilitators for these breakout rooms or captains or whatever are not the people running the event. And so if you are, you're the leader, you're the person running the platform, you're monitoring everything, you can't also be giving your full attention to what's going on across multiple breakout rooms. So I think having that, that team of people that can all work together, that can make it happen, that can make sure that there's somebody who can troubleshoot a tech issue over here at the same time that somebody's helping keep the conversation going over there is really important.
Yeah. And let's see, I saw that Sheila was saying it was so important to prep. Does that mean that you have experience in doing that, Sheila? What would you add to it?
Yeah, I do have some experience, and I just think, again, making sure that people understand, what they're doing, what their function is, and separating them out, as I think Lauren was just saying. Those people cannot be running the meetup. There's got to be the back end people, and then there's the folks that are going to be the champions, or the captains. And so I just think the dry run that Alex just suggested, that is the perfect thing. People need to know what they're expected to do, and that they're comfortable doing it, right? Because not everybody's really comfortable with the awkward silence and the product knowledge that they may need, and how to address it if you don't have the answer top of mind. And documenting things that need to get follow-up, I think, is also another really important piece.
I have
Yeah.
a quick question. Sorry. Are we done?
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to say that the follow-up to these events has been, for me, one of the things that makes it even more successful. I found that people will view these events, if I promote them well afterwards, to the point where I get double the amount of people that are now registered because they go back and register for the event to see it afterwards. If you promote it well. So yeah, lots of follow-up you can do. Go ahead, Tiffany.
So these events that we're talking about are, what kind of a budget are you talking? Are you talking about like a one time a year you hold your own conferences versus smaller events? I was just curious because, we don't always have people that can sit in the various breakout rooms depending on the grand scheme of how big or how large your events are talking. This is the one-time conference that Autodesk has a year. And obviously, there's a lot of colleagues and so forth you can ask to help and so forth. But a lot of the companies are just, 200, 300 people. We don't have as much bandwidth to sit throughout all these breakout sessions and so forth. So I was just curious what kind of a budget, how many shows or conferences or events you have a year. Alex or Lauren, both.
I can quickly speak to I was trying to type in an answer, but it'd be faster. These are pretty much zero budget monthly events. Like you said, thankfully we have colleagues that will volunteer their time. There are two rewards that we are able to use. We have internal applause points that we send to our colleagues that will spend the 2 hours, 1 hour prep call, 1 hour event. And sometimes it behooves them. They get some visibility on social media that they were a part of an Autodesk event. And if we get a customer to come in, we will send them a tea kit to help soothe their throat following, all the talking they did on the meetup, which is about a $30 to $40 spend through Sendoso. So pretty low budget, but it is a lot of work, a lot of sweat equity, a lot of concepting, content creating, and a lot of awkward pauses that we sit through, because these monthly meetups, it's a different topic every time. You're not returning to the subjects, but we're experimenting, and it's gotten us a lot of visibility. And we could probably talk about this later, about how sometimes the events that you throw are the means to achieving a larger goal. We've seen our community grow like gangbusters since we've been starting the promotion of these meetups in March. And so anyway, that's my 2 cents on budget.
Thanks, Alex.
I would say where we are, we're definitely a much smaller organization than Autodesk. I've been hosting quarterly, we're calling them innovation showcases. And what we do is we try to get somewhere in the neighborhood of like 3 to 4 customers, sometimes a partner, to come and present for about 10 minutes. Sometimes we have a theme, or we usually try to have some sort of theme, and we have folks come, they give that presentation, and then we'll have a breakout room to discuss with each presenter. And so customers can kind of hear what other people are doing, and then they can go and they can ask questions. So we typically, Sheila, to answer your question, it's usually relationship managers that are in the breakout rooms helping to facilitate. Typically it's whoever the relationship manager is for the customer that presented will be in that room with them. But we do sometimes have product or other people in the organization there that are part of the conversation and listening, even if they're not officially assigned to that facilitation role. For budget, we have Goldcast as a platform that we leverage. So there's like an annual subscription fee that we pay for that. That's also used by our demand gen team. So it's not just a customer marketing budget expense. And then other than that, we don't really invest a lot of money. To Alex's point, it's much more like the sweat equity. We do tend to send our presenters, of course, we send them a little gift afterwards, but nothing too crazy. When I did the larger like customer conference at Seismic, that was obviously a huge expenditure, but so is the in-person event. So I don't necessarily think that it was a different caliber than what we would have spent on hosting an in-person conference. And that was obviously a once a year kind of all hands on deck experience.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my experience, because we've had customers sit on like part of our town hall meetings, right, where we hear an actual customer talk about their use case or what have you and why they love us and so forth. So that's kind of nice. And I do the same. I send them swag. We go through a dry run and so forth as well. And then they speak at like our sales kickoff annual meeting, so a couple times a year. And then of course there's webinars to try to drive leads for demand gen and so forth. And we try to do that quarterly or as often as we can if we can get a guest speaker, and swag, thank you cards, and so forth. And of course, if they come to our sales kickoff and they show up live at Vegas or wherever we're at, then we take care of all their expenses and so forth. And then send them a gift and show them love, and then take them out to dinner, that type of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing I wanted to just chat quickly about were polls. And this is, I know Mary, you talked about at the beginning, hey, we can do a poll, we can do a quiz. And I think when that functionality came out, there was this idea of like, great, we'll do a poll and then it'll be interactive. And I don't know if this resonates with anybody else, but I feel like I've been on very many calls where somebody does a poll, and then after a few minutes they go, oh, option B won, and then they continue on. And it's like, well, why did we do the poll then, right? If you're not going to say something meaningful about the results. So, if you're going to do something like that, it can be great. It can get people engaged, but make sure, one, that what you're asking them to read is short, right? If it gets too complicated, you're going to lose people's train of thought because they're going and they're trying to read and pick their question, what am I going to vote for? And they kind of lose the train of what they're listening to. So making sure that it's something that they can process as they're continuing to engage with what's being presented. And then also think through, okay, well, if I'm doing a poll and there are 4 options, what am I going to say for each one of these if it wins? And make sure that you're actually building in a space and some content around how you're going to handle that so that there's actual value in having asked people for their opinion. Because otherwise, I think it just is kind of a missed opportunity, and it really doesn't, it feels more like a gimmick to get you to be involved in clicking on something as opposed to something that actually provides value to the attendees.
I would agree with that. I think if I can just talk a minute about this section, encouraging interaction. One of the things that I really like to do is make sure there's engagement on the calls. And for me, that engagement is either getting people to talk back and forth to each other in the chat, as well as to myself or whoever the host is, but getting people on the call to go on the mic and say things. And sometimes I do that with people that, I will call people out, not to be mean, but to give them a little bit of a nudge to say, hey, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. If I see somebody post in comments, I might call them out like I did to Sheila today. Or I might see, I know Kyle has been on a few of the calls lately, Kyle Harris. So I might see her in the audience and be like, Kyle, do you have any questions about this? I know that you've been thinking about all sorts of different things in customer advocacy. What do you think about virtual events? And well, generally, I think people would think, oh, you're going to make people uncomfortable in that. It might, but I haven't had a lot of people afterwards that are like, don't ever do that to me again. And I try to understand who the customer is just a little bit from, comments that they post or things that they post in the community, or even how they, if they're on camera, they're more likely to respond and have a conversation. You see, I'm not on camera because I don't want to have to look at me all the time, but just like pulling a little bit of a thread in each of the people and saying, Ariana, April, Brittany, Julie, are there things that you'd like to talk about or that you could contribute to this topic, especially in this like mastermind or customer roundtable or something like that? Because you get to pull people out of the background and start to learn more about them and their expertise and even turning them into advocates. Go ahead, Alex. I'm done.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Sam can attest that I am mildly obsessed with trying to get our guests to speak and come on camera. And I met a really awesome young man who runs GitHub events in India at Mary, I don't know if you were at that show. It was in Redwood City a few months back. And yeah, he said, I work with rooms full of engineers on in-person meetups, and getting them to come out of their shells is really hard. And the best way to do that is to ask for one-word answers. So we started doing a lightning round right after everyone comes in. We do a really quick intro. So we have to read a legal, let them know that it's being recorded, and we ask them to come on camera. And then we go right into a lightning round so that, I kind of almost have a competition to see how soon I can get our first customer to say something. And that one word answer that I got, that tip from that community manager in India, was a brilliant idea. And just to give some context, we've asked a couple, like our last meetup was, what's the one word you would use to describe your architecture counterpart, for example? And then before that, it was like, what's the very first AI tool you ever remembered using? So it's not so much a discussion question, just something that's really easy, quick, come to mind. Yeah, some people drop it in the chat, but we want people to get comfortable coming on camera, interrupting each other. And another tip that I implemented the last 2 times is, we're sharing a screen with the lightning round graphic so people can start thinking, but as soon as we want them to start talking, stop the share. So you're just looking at the grid of faces, and they're not hiding behind that graphic anymore. They're just, they're all looking at each other, and they want to kill that awkward silence by starting to speak. So that's my my share on being obsessed with getting our customers to talk.
I love that. I try to do some pre-research and just maybe even, like I said, putting a couple of people out there that I know will respond, or I'm like, hey, we talk a lot as, I'm the advocacy person for the company. I know you're a customer that really loves the company. Could you just share a couple of things if I call on you in this call?
That's
And
brilliant.
it seems to help bring people out. And when I ask, like, can you share more about your expertise here, or what's your expertise? And really feeding into that educational and ego side where people want to give back, they want to share. They're not going to grab the spotlight so much because not all educators will. I like to talk a lot about the 4 types of advocates. Your status seekers tend to grab that spotlight, but your educators not so much. But if you know ahead of time that your educators will be on the call and you know what their expertise are, then you can softball them. You can throw it out to them and let them hit it out of the park, and it works really well.
Love that.
I love that one answer thing. That's what I love to hear on calls like this, is where you have these unique little, you know, these unique little things that help us be a lot more successful. So thank you for sharing that.
That's awesome.
Lauren, go ahead and take over your call. Sorry.
No, this is what I wanted. I will say my one little trick from when we did the conference, we had a speaker coach, and I got to watch her deliver the coaching multiple times, which was actually really, really helpful. And one of the things that she talked about was making sure that you have somebody to look at. And so depending on what your setup is, I mean, she actually had like popsicle sticks with pictures of people behind her, like taped to the back of her monitor, so that she had people to talk to. We had one presenter that was like, I had my dad sit in the room just so that there was somebody there, right? He was on the other side of the camera and I was talking to him. I found for me, like how I arrange my screen makes a really big difference. So like in Zoom, right, the default is you have all, when you go into presenter mode, you get all of your faces along the side, but I move them to the top so that I can look at my camera and be looking at all of you guys at the same time. And I find that that is one really helpful just in terms of engaging and being able to see all the things you want to see at the same time, and also making sure that you are doing, you know, you're looking in the right spot to keep your audience engaged. The last thing I want to say here, which I think we've talked a lot about it before, but just also don't forget about the chat. And again, that's something that you'll probably want to have somebody assigned to be monitoring the chat. You get a lot of like, I can't hear, or what's going on, you know, I can't see the slides, like making sure somebody can kind of answer those things, separate out anything that needs to get flagged to the speaker. Hopefully nothing inappropriate happens, but you know, it's the internet and you never know, and you always have to be prepared. So making sure that whoever that person is understands what would be considered acceptable or not, and that there's a clear like, hey, if somebody needs to get booted, how are we going to do that? And hopefully you never have to do it, but just something to be prepared for. And then I want to talk a little bit about measurement, because I think this is always a tricky one, right? So at the bottom here, we have what I would consider more of those like leading metrics, right? You got people to sign up. Hopefully they showed up. They, you know, they hopefully represent the audience that you wanted to have represented. So if you're trying to get, you know, certain sector of customers, if you're trying to target people that are maybe prime for expansion, are those the people that actually signed up and came to the event? And that's kind of like your baseline metric, right? And then moving up is, well, what did they think? And so we always do surveys, both of, you know, understanding what attendees thought, but also for the people that spoke. If we have a customer or a partner speaking on our behalf, we want to know how that experience was, right? Did you feel like you were prepared? Did you have what you needed? Did you think there was, you know, helpful conversation? We want to kind of understand all of those things. And then ultimately, of course, we want all of that to drive other activities. So if we were talking about a new feature, did people who came actually go and activate that new feature? Or if we are trying to get people to become part of our community, did that happen? Or did they, you know, maybe they increased how much they're posting if they were there already? And then in an amazing ideal world, right, you want to actually be able to tie that to revenue. So do we see that when somebody comes to an event, does their expansion deal or their renewal, does this help kind of push it over the line, right? I mean, we're never going to say coming to our webinar was the thing that led to that expansion, but it's hopefully one piece of the puzzle. where they're maybe realizing that the product could be used in a way they hadn't thought of before, or they get a good idea of something else that they could be doing, or they get excited about whatever's new and they want to bring that in, and that makes it a lot easier for our seller to then go in and close whatever it is that they're working on with that customer. But I'm curious, because this is, I think, a tricky area sometimes, right? So how much can we measure? How much can we claim credit for? So I'm really curious on this one, what other people are doing and what you're measuring.
Sam, share your story about what you heard from Tanya was her name.
Yeah, so well, it was a bit of a game of telephone because it was like heard from this colleague who heard from this colleague, but essentially what had happened was we've been doing these monthly meetups for roughly the past 4 or 5 months. And one of the meetups that we had that was tied more so to a product in terms of expansion or transition from one product to another. And according to our colleague who works as a customer success manager and is part of the conversations for customers who are planning to renew and or expand, she had heard through this conversation that they were having with this customer that one of the woman who was on the call, who was the customer, had mentioned that she had been to our virtual meetup, and it sparked the idea or the sort of desire to move forward with transitioning from one of the previous products to the intended product that was more favorable to actually sign on to. And so that was our way of reflecting a direct correlation between somebody or a customer joining our meetup specifically, and then it prompting them to want to have that expansion or renewal conversation with other people on our team. So it was a really cool metric to obtain because, in an ideal world, that would be wonderfully the case for every single person that joins the call. But being able to hear that is definitely very rewarding for us, knowing that we're playing a part in that metric. So yeah.
That's great. That's a fantastic anecdote. I'm gonna take a note from Mary and see if I can call on anybody that hasn't shared yet. So Kyle or Ariana or April or Brittany or Cameron, any thoughts from you guys on measurement or anything else we've talked about so far?
Yeah, hi, this is Ariana. I'm on the customer marketing team at Netscope. So we're a global cybersecurity company. And yeah, I would definitely agree. I think measuring impact on webinars is sometimes hard because it's hard to get a direct number in terms of like how much it's contributing to the pipeline. But we use, and I'll go ahead and come on camera. We use Looker and obviously Salesforce. And then we also use the Goldcast platform as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of the interactive features you utilize, Lauren. I think you said that you guys use Goldcast. But in terms of our webinars, I think because I'm on the customer marketing side, we track things a little differently rather in comparison to the demand gen side. So when we're looking at Looker, the Looker dashboards we use, a lot of times we're doing like marketing attribution. And so we can see kind of the different touch points within a customer's journey. And we can see they attended this customer success workshop, or they attended one of our Inside Netscope workshops, which is really around how Netscope uses Netscope. And so I think that's a good segue into another metric we like to use, which for the Inside Netscope series, again, it's with our Customer Zero team, and they just show different ways that we use our platform internally. And so we also put a poll at the beginning of the webinar, and we allow attendees to vote on the topics they want to hear about next. And we only send one promotional email and we get close to 200 registrations. So I think that also speaks to the value of listening to the customer's voice on what they want to hear and letting that guide your content. But for metrics, we like to look at the gross retention rate. And so we can see, if this customer attended 4 or 5 of our Inside Netscope webinars, how does that impact the GRR to see, or we can, and again, it's kind of hard because it's like a little bit arbitrary. It's not going to be exact, numbers, but I think another metric that we like to think about is, think about case deflection. So we like to look at the tiers. So say there's a lot of tier 4 customers attending these events, they don't have as much hand holding in terms of support. And so we like to look at, how that can affect the case deflection. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers a little bit of your question, but I totally agree when it comes to events, it's hard to, get exact numbers on how that contributed to pipeline, but those are just a few of the metrics we like to use.
That's great. And I see April, I know she had to drop off, but said also tagging attendees in Salesforce. And we definitely do that as well. And then from there, we can say, here is actually the revenue, right? The open opportunity revenue that is tied to the people that attended this particular event. So we definitely look at that as a metric as well. And to your question about Goldcast, I mean, I think I don't know if we're using it to its fullest extent, but we do have it integrated with Salesforce so that when folks are coming, right, if they're registering or they're, we kind of have this whole ecosystem of going from the HubSpot registration form, getting kicked from there into a Salesforce campaign that writes to Goldcast, and then they attend or they don't, and it gets written back, and we leverage the data a lot that way, and it makes it relatively easy once it's all kind of set up and running. It works pretty well. We've done a lot with the breakout rooms. I appreciate that we do all the uploads of all the content in advance, which I think helps a lot just in terms of cutting down the tech issues. We haven't had too many challenges with, screens that don't share or lags or things like that, because the content is already like there and processed ahead of the event. And that seems to make a big difference. And then the other thing I would say that I actually had done before in a different platform, but I think Goldcast just introduced this functionality, so I'm interested to try it again, is when you have a series, if people can actually sign up for the entire series. So we used to do this at Seismic every quarter. We ran a product update webinar, and we just said, do you just want to sign up for these kind of for forever? And we actually had a lot of people choose that option. And then whenever we would schedule the next one, they would automatically be enrolled. They would get the confirmation email. And we found actually, I wasn't sure when we started, are people really going to come, or is this just going to be a thing that they register for and kind of forget about? But people really did show up, and it seemed like it was a much easier way where it just was automatically on their calendar every time. Presumably they were finding the content helpful, which was why they kept coming back, but it wasn't something they had to think about or take any action. Yeah, Alex.
So I wanted to share our experience with multiple registration opportunities versus single. And I know we were kind of talking tech stack. I was just looking up Goldcast, but Zoom has many tiers. I don't know if anybody knew that, but there's also something called Zoom sessions, Zoom events, and we actually have a subject matter expert at Autodesk who is here to train us on Zoom and all of its superpowers. So we did get signed up with sessions, which allowed us to create this monthly series 12 months in advance, one registration link. They can check the boxes. I really wanted that, but the problem is everything has to run through Zoom, the landing page, the registration, and we use Splash. We find Splash to be more graphically pleasing. It just was what our team uses. And the landing, we can do a hub page that shows, it's like a landing page for the program. So we ended up doing it 1 month on sessions and then went back to regular Zoom. But for someone who's super well organized and maybe the topic is the same, like I don't know if anybody here remembers the level ups at Influitive with Rob, that was, you knew kind of what was coming. It was a different subject, but since we're doing something new every month, we like to have specialized branding and a landing page for it. So, I was curious to hear if you did a batch of one-off meetups versus the registration to attendee rate of, the multiple, but I guess you would need more time to find that out. But it sounds like people were coming, which is good. And if you have the ability to look into sessions, you may want to check it out. But that's just what we've experienced.
That's interesting. I don't remember. I think we were using On24, and this is like pre-COVID. So I think the whole tool landscape has changed dramatically since then. I don't think we had to have them specifically on the calendar. We just, when we created the next event, it was created as part of the series, and that
That's
kicked off
nice.
the registration.
Yeah.
So that definitely, I think the idea of having to have them calendared out for the whole year would have been a deal breaker for sure.
Yeah.
We were not that organized.
Did you notice any drop off, Lauren, that people that say they signed up for all 4 sessions for the year, the first one they attended, and then the second one they did it, and then the third one they did? Did you see any type of trends or anything? I'm curious.
I mean, that definitely happened, right? Not everybody attended every single one, but I was really worried that it would be dramatic, right? People would sign up for one or for the series, they would come to one and we would never see them again. That if they didn't take that act of actively registering, that they would just forget about it. And that actually didn't happen. I would say overall, we had pretty steady attendee to registered ratios throughout. So we didn't see that big drop off that we were a little bit nervous about.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I know we're really close to time. I had a slide to talk about hybrid events because I think that's kind of the elephant in the room when you start to talk about virtual events, but knowing that we have 5 minutes, knowing that probably most people have another meeting to go to in 5 minutes, and maybe you would like one of those breaks that we were talking about earlier. I'm thinking maybe we should just wrap here. If there's any final questions, I'm happy to take them, or of course the conversation can keep going in the Slack community. But yeah, any final thoughts that anybody wants to share?
I just wanted to say thank you, Lauren. And I also I so appreciate the other folks that are showing up and providing the input, in addition to what you're sharing, Lauren. I just think these are super beneficial. So thank you all for coming, but, certainly thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I will definitely echo that. And thank you guys for not making me just talk for an hour and for helping be that group mastermind that I was hoping would happen. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm really glad that you came and hope that I will see you either at future calls or on Slack.
And what's the next topic for the next month?
So the next one, we're going to get really fancy and talk about high-end in-person events.
Ooh, fun. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone that participated and shared. Thank you for everyone that asked questions in the chat as well. And there will be a recording I can share and all of that. And Lauren, you did great. Thank you so much for volunteering to do this.
Yeah, thank you. I really had a lot of fun. So
awesome.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Bye.